Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cyclical Investors Club YouTube channel. My name's Corey Kramer. Today, we're going to be revisiting Microchip Technology stock ticker MCHP. As always, it's not individual investing advice, just how I analyze stocks. So I covered this one back in mid-January, and I had covered it previously before that too, I think. And I shared the buy price that I would be willing to buy the stock at. A few people have commented on there on the last video, that noticed that it hit the buy price. It looked like a couple people bought it there. But I was pretty busy and didn't have a chance to make an updated video that said, yes, it's actually a buy. I didn't change anything. So some of this video is going to be a little bit of a repeat of the last one, but I wanted to put out kind of an official notice for those that weren't building their own spreadsheets at home based on my videos and my buy prices. And sometimes they change. I mean, when I share a buy price, several months in advance, there are circumstances that change sometimes. So before I buy them, I give them an additional layer of scrutiny, right, before I buy them. And sometimes those buy prices change based on, what I'm looking at the time, at the current time. So let's take a look at this one, and we'll review kind of the process that I used on this particular stock. I did buy this one in March 2020 and got a really good, over 100% return on it before I took profits. I want to say I took profits on this one right around the peak, actually. I think it was at the beginning of the decline of the peak, so something like that. I forget what the actual returns were, but it did really well with it. And so we're going to use the same process that I used back then. The only difference is I'm going to use the 2020 decline here as my guide, my initial guide. And whereas back then I was using the 2008-9 decline as a guide. So Microchip Technology is a little different and a little unique in that the historical earnings until this decline right now were not super cyclical. Now, probably if you went back to the year 2000, they probably would have been. But the 20 years leading up to the past year, the screen shaded area that you see here, earnings declined 22%. Earnings growth declined that much in 2009 during the recession, but that's not really that much. Usually for a deeply cyclical business, the earnings fall much deeper than that, like 50% or more. And the stock price didn't have a gigantic decline. So even though it's in the semiconductor space, it's not quite as cyclical as you would expect a semiconductor stock to be. So it makes it a little bit unique. It is in the S&P 500. It's a pretty good sized business. But I think what's happened here is we've just had a lot of different factors come together to create a sort of super down cycle. Although earnings are still positive, it looks like they're going to be positive. The earnings growth is really getting hit here. Now, my take on this is partly a boom bust from the pandemic. So if you think of like all the electronics and all the goods that people were buying during the pandemic, probably a lot of those had these guys' chips in them, or they had some part in that. And when I sold, I actually expected earnings to start falling, and it would be their fiscal 20. Let's see, they start the first quarter of 2022. So when I sold up here, I thought earnings were going to fall in that year, probably in the latter half of the year. It took an additional year before earnings fell. So the peak actually continued. The earnings growth grew 31% more in a year I thought it was potentially going to decline. You never know when it's going to happen, but the danger is there based on the history. And that's why I took profits, which is good because I think I actually took it maybe a week later in January. I didn't completely get the top on that one, but that's not really what's important. So it's down almost 50% since I took profits. So that was all good. Now, but initially, the stock price went higher, it fell and then it recovered. This earnings kept growing. I mean, a lot for another year, and they didn't really fall a ton even in the next year. It really wasn't until now that they fell. So This was a big boom, a big upcycle, and now it's having a bust. And because it's a cyclical business, the bust is more profound earnings wise than it would have been. So even though this hadn't happened in the past, just because of the industry they're in, it's not totally and the fact that they didn't suffer the earnings declines at the same time that a lot of other chip stocks did, right? If you look at AMD, I think that's a good, or Micron, a couple other ones that I bought. So see, their declines actually happened right here in 2023, and then they started to recover. Micron might be worth looking at. These are all different kinds of chips, but they're in the same general industry. So here we get the sooner one that I was expecting, right? So by the end of 2022, earnings went completely negative. This was kind of my general expectation for most of the chip stocks, but Microchip Technology kept going for another year basically before that happened. So it ultimately just made it worse, I think, earnings wise. But it's not anything to, I don't think it's anything to like freak out about. I think this is part of cyclical businesses and why you want to take profits when the stock price is high. Now, the tricky part is I'm not going to treat this as a deep cyclical because that's just not how I was doing it, but I'm going to use a recession PE metric that works in a similar fashion. So what I do is I take the peak earnings and the low price of one of the previous downturns. In 2020, I used that 2008 downturn, but I'm going to use this one here. So we have an earnings decline. So we're going to use peak earnings, which is $3.28 a share. We're going to use the low price, which is $29.15 a share, and create a PE ratio out of that. But you'll notice that they didn't happen at the same time. The peak actually happened in 2019. The low price happened in 2020. So that's one of the reasons why you have to, if you want to do something like this, you have to do it yourself, right? Nobody does the recession PEs except for me, basically. It's one of the benefits of just creating the metrics that you find useful. And, this is one of the ones that I find useful because the problem is this: when earnings fall 80% or whatever they've fallen here, 70%, of course the market's going to be negative, but we want to look forward 3 years to 5 years into the future and say, okay, what are earnings going to look like then? And if you're only using the current earnings, it's going to look bad. Like, let's pretend that this was the peak on April 4th or the trough on April 4th. Well, as a 28 PE, well, that's not cheap. When it was cheap was when the PE was half that up here at the peak. It doesn't make any sense. So you can't match up the current PE. You have to look forward or backwards. I look backwards as a guide for what can happen going forwards. So I take the 2019 peak earnings, I take the low price, I create a PE out of that. Then I come over here and I'm going to double check. Sometimes if I know it's a boom situation, I'll create my own peak PE based on previous growth, and then it gets a little more complicated. I'll see if I did that here. I don't think I did. I think I used 602. And then the current price, and you can create a PE out of that, and you can compare the two so that even though we're 2 years past the peak earnings now, we were 1 year past them in 2020, we don't continuously get more negative the more negative earnings go, because we're assuming they're going to come back within a few years. And they can be these dramatic moves. When you have a bust like this, eventually people will need to replace all the stuff that they bought during the pandemic. Might take 3 or 4, 5 years. And when that happens, then there'll be a big surge again in demand. That's in theory, how it works. But the market does not look that far forward. It just doesn't. You can see it falls right with the earnings pretty much here. Sometimes they anticipate a year in advance. Like the market did what I was doing here and then got surprised and then reacted to it, and now it's having the real downturn. So if my spreadsheet will pop up here. Oh yeah, there we go. I'll kind of run you through this. So if you look at the basic earnings metrics, they look horrible. revenue down 30%, 3-year revenue down 30%, long-term earnings growth right? That's because this year's earnings are horrible. So you just have to kind of ignore that, or at least that's what I'm doing. So we have the peak earnings here that I talked about, $6.02 a share. Use the current price right here, and you create a PE out of it, which is that it? That's my, hold on a second. That might be just what the one I'm using. Yeah, that's from the previous recession. So this is going to be from 2020. And I want, this is going to determine my buy price. So I want the current PE, current recession PE. So the current price. I don't know if I have a cell in here. It might be buried in the spreadsheet somewhere. But basically it should be this earnings per share and this price. And then you want to get a PE, something like that. So when you do that, and this is the same buy price I had in the last video, $46.54. Stock earlier today was at that price. It closed slightly higher, but it's kind of hovering around here right now. That was my buy price. So let me see my notes here. Use 2020 as a guide, buy half on the way down, and then probably wait for momentum or something like that, or maybe if it gets deeper. Yeah. So there's a couple different ways. Sometimes I will mix things up a little bit, like in terms of layering into the stock. And that's what I chose to do with this one, where I'm taking half a position now. And then if it goes deeper and bottoms a lot deeper, then I'll try to buy half as it's coming out and it looks like the momentum has changed. And the reason that I chose to do that with this, and I am along this one, I bought it when it first hit the buy price a few weeks ago. The reason I'm doing that with this one is because if you look at the macro situation, it could still get much worse from where it is right now. Now, their earnings have already been hit. I attribute most of that to the boom bust of the pandemic. But now we could layer a recession on top of it. And we don't know if that happens. We don't know how long it'll take to come out. So these are compounding things that could send a business's stock like this way down, quite far. So I'm not saying that this is the bottom. But what I'm saying is, if we kind of muddle through or kind of get through the recession dangers and tariff stuff in this year at some point, then this could be the upside from this price could be really good, right? So last time you can look, it's at about the same price almost that it was here if you add in inflation, 20% inflation. If you bought down here, even if you held, let's just go, I'll just pick a kind of random spot, 1, 2, 3 years, you get 160% return. That was fueled by stimulus money and everything like that. But the potential return is really good if you're buying now, if things don't completely fall off a cliff. And it could still be really good even if they do. It's just that you have to wait longer. If you have to wait 5 years for a 100% return, then that's still a 15% CAGR, which is great, right? But you just have to recognize when you're buying a stock like this, it could fall another 50%. And if we have a recession and things and tariffs are worse than it looks like they're maybe going to be, there's all sorts of bad scenarios that can happen, and stocks like this are going to get hit extra hard. So you want to have that in mind. I don't think I'm some kind of a genius because I bought it somewhere close to actually it took a pretty good dip after I bought it down here. I don't necessarily think that's the bottom, but it could be if things get better faster than expected. And people start doing things that they aren't doing right now. And you just have to look forward that 3 to 5 years. And that's kind of the idea behind it. So Microchip Technology is a buy for half a position, which is I consider like 0.5%. Maybe for some people it's like a 1% of their portfolio. I don't think I'd go more than 1% of a portfolio right now with it. There are other opportunities in chips. I think about 4 or 5 of them during this dip, and I could easily get more if things kind of get a little bit worse in the next weeks and months. So I don't feel like I need to load up on any particular one. I'm going to likely end up with a ton of like semiconductor exposure by the time this is all done. But I can spread it out among the different companies so I don't have specific stock risk. Okay, thanks for watching. If you found this useful, hit the like and subscribe button. See everybody later.